Those individuals who seek fulfillment through lavish spending or the piling up of possessions are likely to be poor specimens of humanity who concern themselves with externalities rather than cultivating their moral, intellectual, and aesthetic capacities. Says the 6th century philosopher Boethius, each year new books, websites, and blogs devoted to frugality, simple living, downsizing, downshifting, or living slow appear urging us to live more economically, advising us how to spend less and save more, critiquing consumerism, or extolling the pleasures and benefits of the simple life. Today, few treat frugality as primarily a method for becoming rich, or at least for achieving financial independence. However, most are concerned with more than cutting coupons, balancing checkbooks, and making good use of overripe bananas. They are fundamentally pursuing about lifestyle choices and values. Philosophers, saints, and culture critics seem generally to agree that frugality and simplicity are praiseworthy, whereas extravagance and luxury are suspect. The frugal tradition tell us living simply or cheaply means adopting a lifestyle that requires relatively little money and uses relatively few resources. One point on which most frugal sages agreed is that such a lifestyle is not difficult to achieve since the necessities of life are few and easily obtained. What are these bare necessities? Strictly speaking, they consist of nothing more than food and drink, adequate for survival and protection from the elements in the form of basic clothing and shelter. Many people like to believe they live cheaply, or at least that they know how to. Even people with 3-car garages, summer homes, and sailboats enjoy telling stories of how earlier in life they lived in a shoebox. But before they get too smug, they should perhaps recall and compare themselves with Diogenes of Sinope. Diogenes is the best known of the Cynic philosophers. The label cynic is derived from the Greek kynikos, meaning dog-like, and it was probably first applied to the Cynics as a term of abuse that likened their way of life to that of dogs. Needless to say, the stories told about Diogenes is that he practiced what he preached. They also suggest that he found it amusing to see how he might live on less and with less, yet he found he could still make do with even less. One day, after seeing a child drinking out of his hands, he threw away the one cup he owned, saying, "That child has beaten me in simplicity." On another occasion, he threw away his spoon after seeing a boy whose bowl had broken eat his lentils using a crust of bread. Diogenes viewed material goods having little or no value, especially when compared to simple, easily obtained pleasures. This is the moral of the famous story about the meeting of Diogenes and Alexander. When the ruler of the world was taken to see the philosopher, he found him sitting contentedly in the sun, asked to name a favor he would like Alexander to do for him. Diogenes merely asked him to stop blocking the sunlight. He argued that since the gods lacked nothing, to want nothing was to be like the gods, and to come closer to this state, Diogenes would toughen himself to put up with any hardship by rolling in the hot sand in summer and embracing snow-covered statues in winter. Not surprisingly, Diogenes was considered pretty eccentric in his time, but he was understood to be putting a philosophy into practice. However, anyone emulating him today, though, would probably be viewed by most people as mentally ill. This brings out the obvious point that what people consider cheap or basic or necessary varies according to time, place, and social class. Philosophy of frugality says, concept of cheap or basic living or necessary. These all concepts are relative. A normal lifestyle for an Athenian citizen in Diogenes' day required far fewer things than are needed by a 21st century New Yorker, whose basic needs might include electricity, running water, central heating, air conditioning, an equipped kitchen, a smartphone, and an internet connection. Some of the people who advocate simple living have been resolutely urban, living their entire lives within cities and showing little interest in bonding with nature. But a connection between simplicity and the natural is a long-standing idea affirmed by many philosophers of frugality. Diogenes was one of the first to urge that whatever is natural cannot be bad and so should not be a source of shame. According to Marcus Aurelius, the natural can never be inferior to the artificial. Stoics particularly stressed the importance of living in harmony with nature, of trying to cultivate a state of mind and a way of being that are attuned to the cosmos rather than at odds with it. The best-known modern example of an individual choosing to live in rustic simplicity away from the artificiality and sophistication of urban society and closer to nature is Henry David Thoreau. In 1845, Thoreau built a small cabin on land owned by his friend Ralph Waldo Emerson, close to Walden Pond near Concord, Massachusetts, and lived there for a little over 2 years. Thoreau was living more economically, more self-sufficiently, and closer to nature than any of his critics. One of the things that makes Walden memorable and important is Thoreau's ability to illustrate and articulate exactly why living close to nature is a cardinal value for people like himself, and why a healthy connection to the natural world would ideally be a feature of every human life. Thoreau says, to be close to nature is necessary if one wants to live deep and suck out all the marrow of life. The first and still one of the finest champions of simple pleasures is Epicurus. Born in 341 B.C.E., Epicurus grew up on Samos. After studying philosophy for several years, he began to teach his own doctrines and develop his own school. According to Epicurus, simple pleasures are such things as plain but good food, satisfying work, the contemplation of nature, and friendship. Naturally, different sages rank these differently. For example, Henry David Thoreau, living in isolation at Walden, places less store on relationships than on the delight he takes in his natural surroundings. However, Epicurus, on the other hand, sharing his living quarters and large garden with friends and disciples, holds that, of all the things which wisdom provides for the happiness of the whole life, by far the most important is the acquisition of friendship. Why praise simple living? We praise simple living because of two reasons. First, moral reasons. Living simply is inherently good, or it fosters certain virtues, or it fulfills social obligations. And second, prudential reasons. Living simply leads to or promotes happiness, understood broadly as well-being and not narrowly as just feeling good. We praise frugal living because it makes one tough. The obvious next question is, why is toughness a good thing? As per prudential reason, if you are tough, you will suffer less when misfortune strikes. And as per moral reason, toughness is a virtue in itself. Thus, frugal living could help one suffer less in adversity. Simple living keeps one away from temptation and the risk of corruption. Frugal sages praise simple living because it keeps one away from the temptation to live beyond one's means, the tried and tested path to financial ruin that is going into unnecessary debt. Philosopher of frugality, Seneca writes to a friend, "I do not interdict the possession of wealth, but my aim is for you to possess it fearlessly. And this attitude you can achieve only if you are convinced that you can live happily, even without wealth." Similarly, the Hebrew Bible, for instance, tells us, "Do not toil to acquire wealth, for he who loves money never has enough, and the covetous man provokes many disputes." Therefore, we should be content to live simply, since there is no happiness for man but to eat and drink and to be content with his work. Living simply means doing things for yourself that leads to self-sufficiency and a proper pride in your independence, as opposed to the false pride of looking down on those who serve your needs. That's all for today's video. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more empowering content. And if our content has inspired you, consider supporting our channel by becoming a member or giving super. Your contributions enable us to keep delivering valuable and uplifting content. Thanks for watching.